Good morning, dear student. Welcome to next lecture of Econ 121 Fundamentals of Agricultural Economics. Today our topic is very interesting and it is about the concept of consumer surplus and it is the last topic of cardinal approach. So we have to discuss what is meant by consumer surplus, which are the assumptions of the consumer surplus. Then we have to take the one example. With the help of that example, we have to give the explanation of consumer surplus. Then which are the difficulties in while measuring the consumer surplus. Then we have to study the importance of consumer surplus. So this is the last topic from the cardinal approach. So we have to also discuss about the which are the limitations of cardinal approach. Then we have to study about the ordinal approach. In the ordinal approach, first one is indifference curve analysis and second one is general equilibrium analysis or consumers equilibrium. Now we will firstly discuss about the consumer surplus. Basically, the concept of consumer surplus, it was given by Alfred Marshall, and according to Alfred Marshall, consumer surplus is measured in monetary units. As we know, we measure the utility cardinally in a numbers, but according to Alfred Marshall, we can measure the utility in a monetary numbers also or in a monetary units also. Now, according to Marshall, consumer surplus is the is equal to difference between what amount of money that consumer are actually pays for buying certain quantity of commodity and amount he would be willing to pay for the same quantity rather than go without it. Means what we have firstly made the main, means what we are willing to pay to buy a certain commodity and what we have actually paid, the difference between these two, that is the consumer surplus. Now when a consumer is prepared to buy a commodity, he always calculates its utility he is going to derive from that consumption of that commodity. Now as we know, as a rational consumer or as a normal human being also, when we go to the purchase any commodity, we always think about the utility derived from that commodity, or we always think that how much amount of satisfaction we will get if we purchase that particular commodity. So every rational consumer compares the utility he derives from the consumption of the commodity against the price he has to pay. Means we always compare the price and the utility and satisfaction that which going to get after the consumption of that particular commodity. So if the utility is more than the price paid, means if we found that, or if we can confirm that when the utility derived from that particular commodity is more than the price, he prefers it, means he choose that or he purchase that commodity. And if it is vice versa, he does not buy the same good. If suppose the usefulness, utility, or the satisfaction derived from that commodity is less than his price, then we do not purchase that particular commodity. So this is a rational behavior or normal behavior of consumer. So the surplus utility he derives, that is the consumer's surplus. Now the definition of the consumer surplus. So simply, consumer surplus is the difference between what the consumer is willing to pay and what he actually pays. Now the assumptions. As we know, for the every law or every concept, when we have to apply that concept on the normal human being or on the particular consumer, we must have to suppose something, we must have to assume some assumptions. So these are the assumptions of consumer surplus. If we have to apply this consumer surplus on the particular person, we must assume that the marginal utility of money for the consumer is assumed to be same throughout the process of exchange. Means here first assumption is that marginal utility of money, it must, we have to assume it is a same throughout the exchange process. Then second, commodity does not have substitute. So second assumption is that when that particular commodity that does not have any substitute in the market. Then third, in the market at a given point of time, there are no difference of income, taste, and preferences and fashion among the consumers. Means there should not be no difference of income, taste, preferences, fashion, okay, among the all consumers. Then each commodity is considered independent of others. Means that commodity should not be depend on sale of other commodities. Means that commodity must be independent of others. So these are the four assumptions of consumer surplus. Now, as we know, while discussing about the consumer surplus, the law of diminishing marginal utility is replicated here, means it is repeated here. Now, we discuss it with the help of one example. Suppose a farmer, suppose a consumer, he has to purchase the mangoes. Suppose he has to purchase the four mangoes and the price of mango is 5 rupees each. The marginal utility derived is equivalent to rupees 20 from the first mango, 15 from the second mango, then 10 from the third mango, and from the fourth mango he will get the marginal utility of 5 only. If you think about the total utility, 20, then from the second it is 35, from the third it is 45, and from the fourth it is 50, and market price is 5 for each unit of mango. Now if you think about the consumer surplus, now for the first unit of mango, that consumer is willing to pay 20 rupees, but actually he pays 5 rupees. So there is the consumer surplus of rupees 15. Now from second mango, that particular consumer, he was willing to pay 15 rupees, but he actually pays 5 rupees. So consumer surplus is 10. Then in case of third unit of mango, he was willing to pay 10 rupees, but he actually pays 5 rupees. So he got the consumer surplus of 5. But from the fourth unit of mango, he was willing to pay 5 rupees and actually he pays exactly 5 rupees. So there is no consumer surplus. So consumer surplus is 0. Now, in this particular example, when that particular consumer buys the 4 units of mango, from the fourth unit, he did not get any consumer surplus, so he stops the purchasing because at the fourth unit, his market price is equal to the what is the marginal utility, means what he was willing to pay is equal to market price. That's why he stopped his purchasing at the fourth unit. But before that, he has enjoyed the consumer surplus of rupees 30. He has enjoyed the consumer surplus of rupees 30 from the purchase of first 3 units of mango. So this is example of the consumer surplus. Now consumer will not go beyond the fourth mango because at this level the price of mango is equal to marginal utility obtained by the consumer. So from the consumption of first 3 mango units of mangoes, that consumer has already enjoyed the rupees consumer surplus of rupees 30. Now there is no consumer surplus from the fourth unit of mango. Now when we plot this example on the graph, we will get this diagrammatic representation. Suppose we have plotted the units of commodity on the x-axis, price or marginal utility on the y-axis. Now here consumer is willing to pay OQRD. What he was willing to pay, consumer? He was willing to pay OQRD, but actually he pays OQRP. But actually he pays OQRP. Now, so along the x-axis, units of commodity are measured. Along the y-axis, the marginal utility or price it is measured, and DD, if you can observe that DD is the demand curve. So at OP price, the number of mangoes purchased is OQ, means at the OP price, number of mangoes purchased are the OQ. Now At the OP, the total amount paid for OQ units of commodity for the mango is OP into OQ, and in the graph area, the area is represented as OQRP, but actual or he was actually willing to pay OQRD here. From the O, Q, R and D he was actually willing to pay, but actually he pays OQRP. Now the consumer surplus will be OQRD minus OQRP, so that upper triangle, that is PRD or DRP, is the consumer surplus. So when if there will be increase in the price, there will be the reduction in the consumer surplus. If the price falls, if the price goes decreases, then there will be increase in the consumer surplus and vice versa. So this is about the diagrammatic representation. Now, which are the difficulties in measuring the consumer surplus? So first difficulty, a complete list of demand prices is not available. Means every consumer is not aware, or is that every consumer does not have the full knowledge of the demand and prices of all the commodities, demand and prices of that particular commodity in the market. So as we know, most of the consumers, they purchase the commodity based on their own guess, based on their own guess work. So a complete list of demand and prices is not available with the consumers, or that particular consumer does not have the full knowledge about the demand and prices of commodity. This is the first difficulty. Second, for the necessaries of life and conventional necessaries, the consumer surplus is immeasurable and indefinite. Means for the necessaries of life, like suppose food, cloth, shelter, these are the basic necessaries of the life. For those necessaries of life, we cannot think about the consumer surplus. We directly purchase it because these are the basic needs. So in that case, the consumer surplus is immeasurable and indefinite. This is the second difficulty. Third, variation in the income of the consumer also poses a problem. Means if there is variation in the income of the consumer, it can also create the problem. Means whether one is a rich and another is a poor, he has to pay the same price for the unit of commodity. Naturally, a person with a low income means he has to greater sacrifice to buy the commodity. Suppose there is one commodity which having the 100 rupees price, the richer person will buy it very easily, or he will enjoy it, but the poor person, he has to pay his greater portion of his income. That's why he will not get that much satisfaction, because he has to pay more amount. Means that 100 rupees is also more for that poor person. So this situation of the consumers makes it difficult to measure the consumer surplus, because the utilities or satisfaction derived from that 100 rupees of commodity is different for richer person and is different for poor person. So that is also the difficulty while measuring the consumer surplus. Now most important, fourth difficulty. If you think practically, the marginal utility of money, it changes. Marginal utility of money changes. That is the most important difficulty in consumer while measuring the consumer surplus. Now as we keep on spending the money of commodity, money on the various commodities, we will be left with a less and less of money. The marginal utility of each unit of money therefore increases as we keep on spending the money in a succession. If we cannot consider this phenomenon, the estimation of consumer surplus does not stand to rationally and reasoning. Means, suppose we have the 100 rupees, we have the 1000 rupees, and as we go on spending the money, suppose I have in the beginning of the month I have the 1000 rupees, and at the end of month I have left with only 200 rupees or 300 rupees, but at the end of the month the value or the marginal value, marginal utility of that money is higher. Because when we left with the less amount of money, we have a more value of that money. Because of this phenomenon, the consumer surplus is estimating consumer surplus is difficult. Now, last, that is about the presence of substitute always makes consumer to go for X commodity instead of Y commodity if its prices rises. Now, as we know, in the most of the commodities, there are substitutes in the market. We always prefer those commodities which having less price. That is the rational behavior of consumer that also creates the difficulty while measuring the consumer surplus. So this is all about the difficulties. Now, importance of consumer surplus. So first one is the conjunctural importance, means when the people enjoy larger the consumer surplus, it does not indicate they are better off. Thus, it serves as an index of economic betterment. Always keep in mind, means if you enjoy the larger consumer surplus, it doesn't mean you are the better off, but it is just index of economic betterment. Second, useful to the monopolist, means that concept of consumer surplus, it is very useful to monopolist because monopolist can freely raise the prices of all the goods if they bring in higher consumer surplus without any fear of foregoing the sales. Suppose a monopoly means a single seller. Suppose I am a seller, I have only that particular commodity, then I am the monopolist, then I will raise the prices for that particular commodity in a without thinking about the sales. So that those commodities which having the higher consumer surplus, that seller means that monopolist will raise the prices. So this concept of consumer surplus is useful to monopolists. Second, third one, help in public finance and taxation. So more taxes can be imposed by government on the commodities which having the high consumer surplus. So to get the more revenue, or to earn the more public revenue, means that government will impose more taxes on such commodities which having the higher consumer surplus. For example, alcohol. Okay, the next is help to measure the benefits from international trade. So, in the international trade, those commodities which are cheaper in the foreign markets, they are imported. So, as we know, those commodities which having the high price in the domestic market, we prefer then the import of that commodities which having the less price into the international market or into the foreign market. So before their imports, the consumer were paying the higher prices. Suppose one commodity which having the higher price in India, domestic price is higher, and which having the less price in the international market. So our government will import that commodity and we will enjoy that consumer surplus. Then with the availability of imported goods which are cheaper, the consumer gets this surplus of the satisfaction. Greater surplus indicates the larger benefits from international trade. Then, so this is all about the concept of consumer surplus, importance of consumer surplus. Now, the as we have already discussed about the law of diminishing marginal utility, law of equimarginal utility, and concept of consumer surplus, all these falls under the cardinal utility approach. Now the limitations of cardinal utility approach. So cardinal approach of Marshall has been criticized by the modern economist. So this approach of the Alfred Marshall, it was questioned by the modern economist. Utility being a psychological phenomenon, means according to the modern economist, that utility is being a psychological phenomenon, is not amenable to measure by numbers and weights, means it is not acceptable uh, by measuring it utility in the numbers and weights. So the marginal utility of money is taken to be constant by Marshall. As we know, in the assumptions we have taken that the marginal utility of money is constant, but in actually the marginal utility is not the constant in each and every situation. So the marginal utility of money is taken to be constant by Marshall, which is not common experience of the consumer, as the marginal utility of money would be more when he left with less amount of money. As I earlier given the example of the 1 month spending, suppose at the beginning of 1 month I have the 1000 rupees, and at the end of the that month I have only 200 rupees or 300 rupees, then the marginal utility of that 200 and 300 rupees is higher than the beginning of that 1000 rupees. Then another shortcoming is that it does not help to separate the income and satisfaction effect. Means consumer surplus or this cardinal utility approach fails to separate out the income effect and substitution effect of commodities. So these are the limitations of cardinal utility approach. Now we have to discuss about the ordinal utility approach. So in the ordinal utility approach, first concept is indifference curve. Now it is assumed that consumer is rational and attempts to maximize utility from his spendable income or from his limited source of income. So it is normal, means it is assumed that every consumer, he behaves rationally. He wants to get the maximum satisfaction from his purchases or from his limited amount of money or income. So it is a fact that consumer makes choice from among many goods so as to maximize satisfaction from their limited money income. Means we have a choice, we make the preferences while choosing the commodity, or we choose such a commodity from which we will get the maximum satisfaction. So in a view of the limitations of cardinal utility approach, modern economists, means as we have earlier discussed, the modern economists who criticize the Marshall's cardinal utility approach. So according to modern economists, they have developed an alternative technique, means they have developed indifference curve technique to examine the consumer behavior. Means they have criticized the Marshall's cardinal utility approach and they have developed new technique to examine the consumer behavior, that is the indifference curve analysis or indifference curve technique. So the indifference curve is analysis is based on the assumption of ordinal utility, or it falls under the ordinal utility approach. Now indifference curve explains the behavior of consumer in terms of the preferences or ranking for different combination of two goods. So here in the cardinal utility approach, we were measuring the utility in terms of the numbers, that is the in weight or in the monetary numbers also. But here in a indifference curve analysis, the consumer behavior, we measures the utility for the consumer in terms of his preferences and his ranking. Means 1, 2, 3, 4. The rankings are given by the consumer for the combinations of two goods. So, since the satisfaction derived from consumption of various goods cannot be measured objectively, it is enough if the consumer indicates his preferences for the various combination of commodities. Means it is enough or it is satisfactory when the consumer will give the preferences for various combinations of commodities. Suppose I have a limited amount of money and I have to purchase the particular commodity. I have an option of different purchases. So I will give the ranking. Firstly, I will purchase this one, second this, third this, likewise. So consumer always give the preferences in the indifference curve analysis or in the ordinal utility approach. Now, an indifference curve is derived from indifference schedule. So indifference curve, that is derived from the indifference schedule. So indifference schedule is nothing but it is just list of various combination of goods arranged in a such a way that consumer is indifferent to the combination, preferring none of the any other. It's called indifference schedule. Here the combinations are A, B, C, D, E, F. So here on the combination of X and Y commodity. If we choose the A combination, we will get the 1 unit of X and 20 units of Y. Then second B combination, 2 units of X, 15 units of Y. C combination, 3 units of X, 11 units of Y. D combination, 4 units of X, 8 units of Y. And E combination, 5 units of X, 6 units of Y. And in case of F combination, 6 units of X and 5 units of Y. Now, in the above schedule, the consumer is indifferent whether he will buy A combination of 1 unit of X and 20 units of Y, or he will go for the D combination in which 4 units of X and plus 8 units of the Y, or any other combination. Means he will choose any one combination, either A combination, D combination, E combination, or F combination. Okay, he can choose any combination. All the above combinations of X and Y commodities yield the same satisfaction to the consumer. If the various combinations are plotted on the graph and joined by a line, it becomes the indifference curve. Means if we plot the good X on the X axis, good Y on the Y axis, and if we join all the combinations on the graph, we will get the indifference curve. Here the indifference curve I is represented here. All the combination on the indifference curve are equally satisfactory to the consumer. Means from each combination that consumer will get the same satisfaction or equal satisfaction. So here the definition of indifference curve. An indifference curve is the locus of the combination of two goods. Means that is the locus of combination of two goods that are equally satisfactory to consumer or to which the consumer is indifferent. Means simply simply indifference curve. It is the locus of the combination of two goods that are equally satisfactory to consumer. So this is the definition of indifference curve. Now, what is indifference map? Means when we plot the set of indifference curve, means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 number of indifference curve on a graph, we get the indifference map. Means a diagram showing a set of indifference curves is called indifference map. So an indifference map is a graphic device that shows the taste of individual consumer. Means first indifference curve for one commodity, second indifference curve for second commodity, third indifference curve for third commodity. So it shows the choice, preferences, or taste of that particular individual consumer for different commodities. So the combination of two goods that lie on a higher indifference curve always preferred to those that on curve below it. Means as we know, as a rational consumer, always consumer wants to get the higher satisfaction. So those indifference curves that lie on higher side, that lie on the right hand side, they must be preferred because from that combination that consumer will get maximum satisfaction. Now, properties of indifference curve. If you observe the indifference curve on the indifference map and individual indifference curve, you will see that the shape of indifference curve, that is the convex to origin. It is convex to origin. The absolute slope of an indifference curve declines as we move along the curve from left to the right. This means that marginal rate of substitution of goods is diminishing. Then second property is negatively slope. Means keep in mind the four major properties of indifference curve: convex to origin, negatively slope, non-intersecting, and fourth one is indifference curve that lies to the right. Another does have the higher utility. So second, negatively slope. When an indifference curve has a negative slope, which implies that or which shows that if the quantity of one good increases, the quantity of other good must be decreases. As we have seen in the indifference schedule, If the quantity of x increases, means 1 from 1 to the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you can observe the quantity of y decreases from 20 to the 5. So that is because of negative slope of indifference curve. So this is to keep the consumer on the same level of satisfaction. Okay. Then next is non-intersecting. So indifference curve do not intersect each other. Means if they intersect, then the point of intersection would be employed to two different levels of satisfaction. If they intersect, then that point will yield different level of satisfaction. But as we know, according to definition of indifference curve, that indifference curve must give the same level of satisfaction. That's why they are not intersecting each other. Then an indifference curve that lies to the right of another denotes the higher utility, and combination of goods on higher indifference curve are preferred by consumers. So these are the properties of indifference curve, and this is all about the indifference curve. Now next one is about the budget line. So what is budget line? Means when we plot the combination of the two goods and on the graph we get the indifference curve. On the other side, when we plot the combination of two goods that could be purchased with given amount of income, that could be purchased with given amount of income, means we have a limited amount of income or certain amount of income, and when we have to purchase that commodity in that particular certain amount of income, then that combination or that line will show the budget line. Okay, so consumer choices are made subject to income. As we know, the choices of every consumer, they depends on the income they having. Then income acts as the constraint to maximize the satisfaction by the consumer. Means as we know, for the every consumer, the income acts as a constraint or problem for getting the more and more satisfaction. Suppose a particular consumer, suppose for example, one consumer, he has to spend the 50 rupees on a two goods, that is X and Y. The price per unit of X and Y is rupees 5 and rupees 2 respectively. Means for rupees 5 for good X and for rupees 2 for good Y. If a consumer spends his entire income on good X, he will purchase the 10 units. Means 5 into 10, he can purchase only 10 units within that 50 rupees of good X. Then on the other hand, if he spends all his income on the good Y, he can purchase the 25 units of the good Y, because good Y having less price, that is the 2 rupees per unit. So in the 50 rupees he can purchase the 25 units of good Y, and in case of good X he can purchase only 10 units. So these two possibilities of spending rupees 50 are shown in figure. The line connecting the point A and B denotes the budget line, means that line AB is the budget line. So in a simple language or definition of budget line, a budget line shows all possible combination of good X and good Y, or all possible combination of two goods that could be purchased with given amount of income, that is that could be purchased in a given amount of income, means from that 50 rupees. So this is a definition of a budget line. So change in price of goods or more income shift the budget line. If there is change in the price of one good will happen. If suppose the price of X, that is the 5, if it is goes to the 10, then there will be the shift in the budget line. So keeping the prices of goods constant, if the money income increases, the budget line shifts parallel to itself. Even if we think the prices of goods are same, and if there is change in your income, suppose instead of 50 we have your income is increased to 100 rupees, then there will be the shift in budget line. If income increases, budget line shift to right side, and if income decreases, budget line shift to left side. So since the relative price ratio does not change, the slope of budget line remains the same. Now, the slope of budget line indicates the price ratio of two goods. Means that downward slope or the slope of the budget line, it shows the price ratio. It shows the price ratio of two goods. Question may be asked, the slope of budget line indicates dash dash. So slope of budget line, it indicates the price ratio of two goods, and you remember the definition of budget line, which is important. Then consumer equilibrium. Last topic, that is about the consumer equilibrium, means when that particular consumer will be in equilibrium position. Equilibrium means state of balance. So having known the consumer preferences as indicated by indifference map and the information on the income and prices of goods as given by the budget line, now we have to determine the combination of goods which maximize the satisfaction, that is the equilibrium condition. Means at what particular point that consumer will be at maximum, that consumer will get the maximum satisfaction. So a rational consumer or normal consumer want to choose the higher difference curve from the given budget constraint, from the given amount of budget. So here you can observe the budget line is there, line AB is the budget line. Then so that line is the budget line. Then there are the three indifference curve, that is indifference curve 1, that is I1, indifference curve 2, I2, and indifference curve I3. So on the x-axis there are good x, on the y-axis good y, but there is indifference curve 2 that touches the budget line. So indifference at the indifference curve 2, that consumer will be in equilibrium position, means the point at which your budget line touches the indifference curve, that is the point B. At that point that consumer will get maximum satisfaction. So that is the point of consumer's equilibrium, means the point at which indifference curve touches or intersects the budget line. At that point the consumer will be in equilibrium position, means he will get the maximum satisfaction at that particular point. So here we can observe that the optimal position of the consumer is at the point B, where the budget line is just tangent to the indifference curve. To tangent means it touches to the indifference curve 2. So the combination D is preferred to be beyond the budget limitation, means combination D means that D point on the indifference curve can be preferred instead of B, but here having the limited amount of money. So combination A and combination C are on the budget line but are inferior to the combination B because they are on lower indifference curve. As we know, according to characteristics of indifference curve, the indifference curve which is on higher side can be preferred by the consumer, but here is the problem of money constraint, here is the problem of the income. We have to purchase according to our budget, according to our budget line, according to our money income limitations. If I have only 100 rupees, I will purchase the commodities from that 100 rupees only. I will not go beyond the 150 or 200 rupees. I will choose such indifference curve on that, from that 100 rupees I can purchase. So any indifference curve to the right of I2 is the beyond the reach of consumer's income, means I2 is the limit, and after the I2 means that is I3, I4, they are the beyond the limit, they are the beyond the income of that consumer. So he will be not prefer that consumer, that indifference curve. Thus the combination of B indicated by the tangency of indifference curve 2 and the budget line is the best combination of goods that the consumer can purchase. So at the point of tangency means at the point of touching the indifference curve with the budget line, the slopes of indifference curve and the budget line are equal. So that is the point of consumer's equilibrium. So this is all about the today's lecture. You can prefer the book Agriculture Economics by Subba Reddy and Elementary Economic Theory by K.K. Debate. Thank you.